Hi, this is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next I'm going to talk about what I saw with the strength of the comic market in the last week, some high sales, and another spec book that seems to be a little bit out of control. So stay tuned. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. If you've watched my prior market videos, you know what I'm going to be talking about during this. But if you haven't, if you enjoyed this, remember, please hit the subscribe button. But I watch the Heritage auction every week, the Heritage comic auction, and I take quite a few of their books, the key books that I'm interested in, that cross all different ages, all different publishers, and I evaluate what I think their price is going to be, and then I compare what they actually sold as to that evaluated price to try to determine if we are still in a strong comic market, if we're starting to see downtrends, if we're moving up, those kinds of things, because we've had a lot of big changes in the market recently, and so this is data that I'm using to try and understand what's going on. So this is the 5th week that I've done this, and we've had really consistent data each week, which to me tells us that we are continuing to see strength in the comic market, nothing that's really concerning. This week I priced 163 books. Typically I price anywhere from about 160 to 180. And of those 163 books, 63% were above my estimate, which is a little higher than what I've seen previously. Usually I'm around 52 to 53%. Last week it was 59, and so 63. So we're seeing strong sales compared to what I'm estimating. Now the other thing I look at are the number of sales that went 20% or more above my estimate. And this actually dropped this week, with only 21% going above my estimate compared to the last 3 weeks, which had been up around 27 to 29%. Then the number of sales that were 20% or below my estimate also went up a little bit to 14%, which has traditionally been approximately where I've been seeing those numbers for the last few weeks. So I don't think there's anything that's really concerning with that. We are still seeing more than 50% of sales going above my estimates. Just this week, not quite as many on that extreme end, on the above 20% above my estimate. Now the last thing that I look at is the number of new highs. So the new highs within that grade for that book. And this week, again, 48% of the sales were new highs within the grades. We've been hovering right at 50%. We've had 51, 49, 50, and now 48. So I think that continues to show a lot of strength, that we're seeing new highs within the grades for these books. Now the other thing that I like to look at when I look at these high sales are the trends. And again, I saw high sales across all ages and publishers, but there were some very specific areas where I saw more strength than others. And so one of them, Golden Age, really, really strong this week. In the Golden Age, out of the 79 new high sales that I saw, 31 of them were from the Golden Age. And this was across pre-code sci-fi, a lot of pre-code horror from titles like Vault of Horror, Tales from the Crypt, Shock Suspense Stories, and Haunt of Fear. Also quite a few superhero titles like All-Star Comics, All Select Comics, Captain America Comics, and Submariner. So a lot of strength in the Golden Age. Now Amazing Spider-Man, that was one that really hadn't been moving quite as much as some of the other titles like X-Men and Fantastic Four that had really been more undervalued, but I'm seeing a lot of new highs in Amazing Spider-Man the last few weeks. Again, 7 new highs from the books that I was watching, and one that I'll be talking about a little bit later. And then in Fantastic Four, again, a lot of strength, 8 new highs, also one that I'll be talking about later, and a title that I've mentioned before, Marvel Premiere. There were 3 new highs. This is a Bronze Age title that has a lot of great first appearances in it. Issues 1, 15, and 47. So the first Warlock, first Iron Fist, and first Scott Lang as Ant-Man, all new highs, and I've mentioned those books before, so we are continuing to see a lot of demand for those Bronze Age books. Then the X-Men, again, 5 new highs, but the ones that I've been seeing are ones that hadn't moved as much. These are the types of books that I was mentioning before when I did my analysis on the top 10 X-Men books. You've got to look for those books that haven't moved and go after those, because they all seem to be catching up to one another and going up similar percentages. And so this was issues 2, 3, 50, 130, and 133. So issues that were maybe overlooked are starting to see that strength. Now, DC was weak again this week. I just saw a few high sales, mostly in the Golden Age, like I had mentioned with All-Star Comics. But, I mean, it's the way it's been for a while. DC just doesn't have as much strength as Marvel. There just isn't as much demand out there. If DC can get its act together, I think it's a great place to be, but they continue to not see the strength that we see in Marvel titles. Alright, so now on to the high sales. Now, I like to throw the one in the front that was really the most shocking to me, and this was Tales to Astonish number 90 in a CGC 9.8. This sold for a record $19,200, and I mean, this is another one of those that as I was watching the auction, I could not believe the price that this book was hitting. And this is the book that I think is just speculation, again, going out of control. Now, this is the first appearance of the Abomination. He's not on the cover, but this is his first appearance, and he was the villain in the last standalone Hulk movie that was fighting against Edward Norton. And he is slated, apparently, to be the villain in the upcoming She-Hulk show. And he's also potentially a member of the Thunderbolts, because there's been some speculation around that. But, I mean, even with that speculation, going after these villains like that, I don't recommend their first appearances. They are often gone after one season or one movie or whatever it might be, and then the demand for them goes away and the value for the books just evaporate. So be careful with buying those books. Now, I had estimated the price at $9,000, which I had already thought was being pretty aggressive, considering the prior high was $6,888 just from August of last year. And this was 113% above my estimate. And it's not a rare 9.8 book either. There are 6 9.8s of this book out of only about 390 or so, I think, total graded copies. Now, if you look at that for comparison, Fantastic Four number 49, which has 10 times the number of copies graded, has 1 9.8. This one has 6. And so I don't see the value there in that book. Now, like I mentioned, the prior high for this book was $6,888 just from August of last year. It's an increase of 180%, or about $12,300 in less than a year. And so what I like to do is I just say, ask yourself, is anyone going to care about the Abomination after that She-Hulk show? Probably not. So if that's the case, be careful when you're speculating on a book like that, or be ready to sell it when the hype builds up around that show. Now, for alternatives, I don't think you really need to get an alternative for this book. Lower grade copies should still be very affordable. The Tales to Astonish run in the later numbers really doesn't carry a whole lot of value. Now, you will probably see some price increases because of this very high sale. So if you really want it, might just be wait until after the She-Hulk show is over and then go pick up that book. All right, now the next book is one that may be very familiar to most of you. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 252 in a 9.8. This sold for $3,360. But the thing that's different with this copy is that this is the Canadian price variant. So you can see that with the picture that I have up here, that it's a 75-cent price instead of the 60-cent price that you would normally see on the US version of that book. Now, I picked this one to show how big of a price difference you can have for the Canadian price variants of the 9.8s. Now, this isn't true for all price variants. For example, the pence variants, the UK price variants, generally sell for less. So this is an anomaly that exists largely with the Canadian price variants and somewhat with the Australian price variants when you can find them. Now, I had an estimated price of $3,150, so I was right about on with that one, within about 5 to 6%. And how I estimate that is that they generally sell for about 50% above the direct price in a 9.8, and directs have been going for around $2,100 in a 9.8. Now, the prior high for this book was $1,812 on November 29th of last year. So that's an increase of 85% in 6 months. That's a big jump for this book, especially since it was much lower about a year ago. This book overall, Amazing Spider-Man 252, is way up over the last year. A year ago, there was a sale at $921 in April of 2020. So it's up about 300%. And that's getting up near the higher end. The 300 to 400% is what I generally am seeing for the big moves in a lot of these keys right now. Now, the reason I like to point out this book is that there are a lot of people that don't care about newsstand variants or Canadian price variants, those kinds of things. But it's something that's still important to be aware of because there are people that do care a lot about those books. Me, for example, I really like newsstand variants. There are other people that really like Mark Jeweller's inserts or the National Diamond insert or Canadian price variants. So it's important to know that these books carry a lot of additional value. Maybe not so that you can have them, but if you find one, just so you know that that carries that extra value that you could then turn around and sell and get something else that you're interested in. Now, you don't really need an alternative for this book. You could always go with lower grades, go for the direct edition, the newsstand edition. But there are other important books for the first appearance of the Black Suit. You've got Marvel Team Up number 141, as well as Spectacular Spider-Man number 90. Now, Spectacular Spider-Man number 90 is one that you may want to consider because that book really hasn't moved as much as Amazing Spider-Man 252 and Marvel Team Up 141. It's often the overlooked book for that, first appearance, the tied first appearance of the Black Suit. So if you want one of these books in a 9.8, that may be the one to try to go after because it likely will start to increase in price like these other books as well. All right, I thought this next book was really cool. So this was Daring Mystery Comics number 3. Now this was a raw book. This was graded as a 2.0 by Heritage. It's a book from 1940, sold for $7,200. And the thing I just think is funny about this cover is that there are a surprisingly large number of these Golden Age covers where they have women strapped to rockets that some villain is going to be shooting off. I don't know why that was a thing back then, but it seems to be. And so that's what's on this cover. This is from Alex Schomburg, and his war-related covers are always in high demand, always going to be expensive, and this is a very rare book. This is a number 7 on the Gerber Scarcity Index. So I had talked about that Gerber Scarcity Index before. I have these books that I've recommended in the past, to pick up that are all of those Golden Age books and the Gerber Scarcity Index for them. I do recommend getting those, but there are only 12 universal copies of this book on the CGC census. Now, like I said, Heritage had estimated the grade of this book as a 2.0, but I think it looked a lot nicer than that. I think it was better than a 2.0, and I think the other bidders agreed because I had estimated the price of this book at just $2,000, and that was based on the advertised 2.0 grade, but a 5.5 was the last recorded graded sale, and it went for $3,915 back in 2019. And so this just crushed that sale, and this wasn't a 5.5. It was definitely lower than that, but regardless, that is a big sale for something that's down in that grade range, especially with a raw book, because even with a trusted seller, someone like Heritage, you're taking a lot of risk buying a raw Golden Age book. That book has been out there a long time. There could be some type of color touch or edge trimming, something that got missed, and that is going to really hurt the value of your book. Now, this sale was $5,200 above my estimate, or 260% above my estimate, so way up there. It was also almost the record, even as a raw book, for a graded book. The high was a 7.0 that sold for $9,560 all the way back in 2009. Would probably sell for a lot more now, but just that's showing how strong this sale was. And I've talked about alternatives for Alex Schomburg covers before. Generally, if you're looking for World War II type covers, you're going to have to spend a lot of money. You're going to be spending over $1,000 for just about any book. So the recommendation I gave before, and I'll give it again, is look for books that are after 1945, that aren't World War II type covers, and you should be able to find something that is much more affordable, below $1,000. All right, this next one, I always like to talk about this book because I have a 8.5 of it right behind me back here. And this is Fantastic Four number 49, where a CGC 7.0 sold for a record $4,800. And this is the first full appearance of Galactus. It is the second appearance of the Silver Surfer, and it is the first cover appearance of both Galactus and the Silver Surfer. And I'm planning on doing my next top 10 video on Fantastic Four, so I will definitely have this book in there, just something to be aware of in the future. And I had estimated the price of this book at $4,000, so this was 20% above my estimate. The prior high was $4,135 on May 5th, but there was also a $3,900 sale on May 6th. So this set a new record by about 16% in just 3 weeks. A year ago, this was a $1,200 book. And so that's an increase of about 300% in a year. And like I mentioned with Amazing Spider-Man 252, that number around 300% is where I'm seeing a lot of the big popular keys hitting compared to around a year ago. So this is a huge jump. Now, there are a lot of great alternatives for this book because this book is getting really expensive. Number 48 is getting really expensive. But Silver Surfer appeared in a lot of books early on. And so there, like I said, there are great alternatives. Fantastic Four 50, his third appearance and first solo cover, still relatively affordable. A 3.0 sold for $390 on May 17th, and a 3.5 sold for $500 on May 23rd. Now, if you go to his fourth appearance, which is a great cover of him battling the Thing, which I have right back here as well, right in the middle. And that is also a very affordable book with a 4.0 selling for $125 on May 17th, and a CBCS 5.5 selling for $96 on May 16th. So again, showing how much more affordable those CBCS books can be. And then a 7.0 sold for just $315 on April 29th. So in comparison, 7.0 selling for $4,800 for issue 49, selling for $315 for issue 55. Now, his solo run, issue number 1, which I also have back there, over here. That one has gotten much more expensive lately. So you're not always going to be above $1,000 for that book, but a lot of the grades are now above $1,000. Some other great options, though, within the Fantastic Four run are issues 72, 74, 75, and 77. They're all Silver Surfer covers. I'd go for 72. It's a great cover. It was used by CGC for their custom Silver Surfer label. 74 is also a good one because Galactus is very prominently displayed on that cover, so I think that is another great option for a Silver Surfer Galactus type cover. Now, this next one I picked, I didn't pick because it's a super high sale or anything. I picked it because it is a trend that we've been seeing over the last about 6 months. And this is Sonic the Hedgehog number 1. This was a CGC 9.4 that sold for $204. Like I said, not a huge sale, but there have been these trends recently with books based on video games having much bigger sales. There's a lot of popularity in these graded video games, and for displays, people like to put graded comic books next to a graded video game. So we've been seeing big sales in these types of books, so they're things to keep an eye out for because you could definitely find books like these in dollar bins. So I had estimated the price of this book at $150, so this was 35% above my estimate. The prior high was $100 back on November 17th, so it's a jump of 100%. But a 9.8 had a sale of just $320 on May 1st, but I don't think it's going to stay that low for very long. I think the price of those 9.8s are really going to go up because books like this usually weren't going to be books that were very well cared for. There are only 79 Blue Label 9.8s and only 234 graded copies, so there aren't a lot of these out there. We may start seeing more submissions if the prices keep going up, but as of right now, not a lot of those. Now, if you really like Sonic the Hedgehog, I wouldn't really go for an alternative. You could get this book. It's not that expensive right now. If you want to get one of the other Sonic the Hedgehog key books, issue 13 is the first appearance of Knuckles, so that's one that you could go after. But if you're more into Nintendo, if you want to go for something Mario related, the best one is the unnumbered Nintendo Comics Systems. It's from Valiant. This is a very expensive book now. If you've got a high-grade copy, a 9.8 sold for $2,500 back in November. I sold, I believe it was a 9.4 for $800 in maybe December of last year. So that is an expensive book. Another good option is issue number 1. 9.8s have sold for over $1,000, $1,034 on February 14th. So keep your eyes open for those books. There are some very expensive Zelda books too, so there are some other ones to really keep an eye out for. Legend of Zelda number 1 in a 9.8 sold for $1,675 on April 11th. And these prices might seem high, but when you compare them to what people are paying for high-grade early copies of these sealed video games, where they're spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, these prices are very reasonable. So if somebody wants one of those books to display next to one of those games, and if they're spending $50,000 on a graded game, $100,000 on a graded game or more, I don't think they're really going to sneeze about spending $1,000 or $2,000 on a nice graded copy of one of these books. So just something to keep an eye out for if you're looking through bins, that kind of thing. Those books have a lot of value, especially in high grade. All right, now this next one, wanted to talk about a book from DC. This is a pretty cool book. I really like this cover. This is Strange Adventures number 205. Had a pretty rare high grade copy, a CGC 8.5 that sold for $1,560. Now this wasn't a record, but because there was a sale of $1,599 back on May 3rd, but this is the first appearance of Deadman. He may be slated to appear in the Justice League Dark series on HBO Max, so it's a book that could see a lot of gains in the near future. It's a rare book in high grade, like I mentioned, and there's not a whole lot of these books in general. There's only 853 graded copies, and only 144 at this grade or higher. And to compare that with a Marvel key from a similar time frame, let's talk about Fantastic Four number 49. There are 3,393 blue label graded copies of that book, with 160 at 8.5 alone. So comparison of a DC key from the same time period to a Marvel key, way more of those Marvel graded books are available. Now, I had estimated a price at $1,500, so this was right about at my estimate, just about 4% above my estimate. And like I said, the high had already been set at $1,599 on May 3rd, so this is really just a confirmation of that sale. But this is a significant jump. This was just a $900 book back on December 20th. It had a $1,050 sale on December 18th, so it's a jump of about 50 to 60% from that time. But a year ago, this is about an $800 book. It's an increase of around 90 to 100%. That's a pretty significant gain for a DC book. Now, for alternatives, if you really want the first appearance of Deadman, I would just go for this book. There are raw copies that are out there available that you can spend a few $100s on. Graded copies, a 2.5 sold for $156 on April 19th. A 4.0 sold for $299 on April 2nd. A 4.5 sold for $273 on April 4th. And a 5.5 sold for $405 on May 10th. So all very reasonable prices for these books. You don't have to spend an arm and a leg. You could go for the second appearance, 206, which is the first time that the book has interior art from Neil Adams. So that is another cool book to try to pick up. He's on the cover of both of them, so they're both great covers for Deadman. For the last book, I'm going to jump back into the Golden Age with another Alex Schomburg raw book. And this is Submariner, number 15, graded by Heritage as a 3.0. I agree with this grade. This was a detached cover. It's a nice looking copy, but the detached cover just really limits the higher end of that grade. Sold for $1,680. And this is another World War II Alex Schomburg cover. And you will find that you can often get the Submariner covers for a little less than the other timely titles like Marvel Mystery Comics or Captain America comics. So that is another option if you're looking for World War II type covers. This one, still above $1,000, but probably not as much as you would have spent with one of those other titles. Now, that may not be true for long. If the hype and speculation around Submariner is true, then he may be appearing as the villain in the next Black Panther movie, and if that happens, these books, just like his Silver Age books, are going to go up a lot. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $1,200. This is 40% above my estimate. A graded 3.0 sold for $455 back in 2016. That was 5 years ago, so tough to do a comparison. But with these rare Golden Age books, you really have to take some kind of shots in the dark because it's tough to tell exactly what they're going to sell for. Especially with this one, there's only 42 blue label copies on the census, so they don't come up for sale very often. Now, a 0.5 sold for $600 back in February, but it was a really nice looking 0.5. The reason it was a 0.5 is it was missing the centerfold, and so you could see why that one would have sold for quite a bit for the grade because it's such a nice presenting copy. Now, a 5.0 sold for $1,825 in May of 2019, and a 5.5 sold for $1,695 in October of 2019. So that's why I had my estimate of around $1,200 for this book that was estimated to be a 3.0. And again, you're taking that extra risk when you're buying a raw book because there's always the possibility that some type of restoration got missed or there could be something in the interior missing. It's just a risk you're taking with a raw book. Now, for alternatives, I talked about Alex Schomburg alternatives with the earlier book, and so I won't go into that again, but If you want a Submariner book, I recommend looking at issues after number 20. They tend to be a little more affordable once you get after issue number 20. Prior to that, there's a lot of these World War II covers, so they are a little more expensive. All right, so those are all the books that I wanted to talk about. Again, we saw some very consistent, strong sales this week. Nothing that's really concerning to me with the comic market as it stands right now. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this, and I will see you in the next video.